Hello everyone. Today, Biker Justice Analyst bring you a story full of humanity and compassion. Enjoy listening.
Bully slapped an elderly widow at diner, not knowing her son was a Hell's Angel. The morning sun streams through the windows of the small town diner, casting a warm, inviting glow on the tables. Evelyn, the 70-year-old widow, hums a quiet tune as she wipes down the counter. She greets the regular customers with a kind smile and offers refills of coffee. The familiar sound of the bell above the door rings as another customer enters. "Good morning, Martha," Evelyn says warmly to the young waitress who has just arrived for her shift. "The coffee's fresh, and I've already filled the sugar dispensers." Martha returns her smile, tying her apron around her waist. "You're always here so early, Mrs. Harrison. I don't know how you do it." "Oh, old habits die hard," Evelyn replies, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Besides, this place keeps me going." She glances around the diner, taking in the worn but clean booths, the gleaming counter, and the familiar faces of her morning regulars. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today?" Now back to the story. Mr. Peterson sits in his usual corner booth, newspaper spread out before him as he sips his coffee. The Wilson sisters occupy their favorite spot by the window, sharing gossip over plates of toast and scrambled eggs. These people aren't just customers, they're family. Evelyn moves between the tables, topping off coffee cups and exchanging pleasant words with everyone. Her hands may not be as steady as they once were, but she still manages to pour without spilling a drop. The routine brings her comfort, helps fill the lonely hours since her husband passed. "The usual, Mrs. Harrison?" Mr. Peterson asks as she approaches with the coffee pot. "You know me too well, George," she says with a gentle laugh. "Some days I think you've been coming here longer than I have." 30 years this March, he replies proudly. "Never found better coffee anywhere else." The morning light grows stronger, painting golden patches on the checkered floor. The smell of bacon and fresh pastries wafts from the kitchen, mingling with the rich aroma of coffee. Evelyn pauses at the counter to rest her feet for a moment, taking in the peaceful atmosphere of another morning at the diner. Mrs. Chen from the flower shop across the street comes in, bringing with her the scent of fresh roses. "Evelyn, I brought you something," she says, producing a small bouquet of pink carnations. "They reminded me of you." Evelyn's eyes moisten as she accepts the flowers. "Oh, Sarah, you shouldn't have. They're beautiful." She finds a small vase under the counter and arranges them carefully, placing them where everyone can enjoy their beauty. The morning continues its gentle rhythm. Evelyn smiles as she places a fresh cup of coffee in front of an elderly gentleman who comes in every morning. The door swings open again, and Frank, the burly, loud man in his mid-40s, enters with a scowl on his face, heading to the counter. Frank's heavy footsteps echo across the diner floor as he makes his way to the counter, his face twisted in a perpetual frown. The peaceful morning atmosphere shifts, like a cloud passing over the sun. He drops onto a stool with enough force to make it creak, snatching up the laminated menu with thick fingers. "Coffee? Black?" he barks at Martha without looking up. The young waitress hurries to comply, her hands trembling slightly as she places a fresh cup in front of him. Evelyn watches from her spot near the register, noting how the other customers have grown quieter, their conversations dropping to whispers. Frank flips through the menu aggressively, the pages making sharp snapping sounds. When Martha returns with the coffee pot, he barely acknowledges her presence. "What's good here?" he demands, though his tone suggests he doesn't expect much of an answer. "Everything better not be as stale as it looks." Martha opens her mouth to respond, but Frank cuts her off. "Never mind. Just get me the breakfast special, and make sure the eggs are actually cooked this time." He slams the menu down on the counter, the sound making several customers jump. Catching Evelyn's eye, Frank's scowl deepens. She offers him a gentle smile, the kind that usually helps ease tension with difficult customers. But Frank just rolls his eyes and turns away, muttering something under his breath about nosy old women. The minutes tick by, marked by the soft clink of cutlery and murmured conversations. Frank drums his thick fingers on the counter, checking his watch every few moments, as if each second is a personal offense. The other customers give his seat a wide berth, creating a bubble of empty space around him. Martha delivers his breakfast with remarkable speed, setting the plate down carefully. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" "This toast is barely brown," Frank complains, poking at it with his fork. "And where's the hot sauce? Don't tell me you forgot that, too." "I'll get it right away," Martha says, her voice small but professional. She hurries to retrieve the condiment, nearly bumping into Mr. Peterson in her haste. Evelyn continues her rounds, keeping one eye on the situation. She's seen all types come through her diner over the years, and she's learned that sometimes the angriest customers are the ones hurting the most. Still, she maintains her distance, not wanting to escalate Frank's already sour mood. The morning progresses, and Frank continues to eat, stabbing at his food as if it had personally wronged him. Martha approaches with the coffee pot, moving to top off his half-empty cup. "I didn't ask for more coffee," Frank's voice booms across the diner. "Can't you wait until I'm finished? Or is that too complicated for you to understand?" Martha steps back, coffee pot clutched to her chest. "I'm sorry, sir. I thought—" "Well, you thought wrong," Frank snaps, his face reddening. "Just like everything else this morning. Can't anyone in this dump do their job right?" Evelyn sets down her cleaning cloth, her movements deliberate and calm. She's dealt with angry customers before, and she knows that meeting anger with anger only feeds the fire. As she begins to make her way toward the counter, her steps measured and unhurried, Frank jerks around in his seat. His sudden movement catches the edge of his coffee cup, sending it spinning. Dark liquid splashes across the counter, creating a growing puddle that drips onto the floor. Coffee drips steadily from the counter's edge, forming a dark puddle on the freshly mopped floor. Frank pushes himself up from his stool, his face flushed with anger. His chest heaves as he turns to face Evelyn, jabbing a thick finger in her direction. "This is your fault," he shouts, his voice bouncing off the diner's walls. "You run this place, don't you? Everything here is a joke. The service, the food, all of it." The other customers set down their forks and cups, all eyes now fixed on the unfolding scene. Mr. Peterson, the elderly regular, half rises from his booth, but his wife tugs gently at his sleeve, shaking her head in warning. Evelyn's hands clasp together, her knuckles white. "Sir, please," she says, her voice steady despite her obvious discomfort. "Let me get someone to clean this up, and we can discuss any concerns you have calmly." "Calmly?" Frank's laugh is harsh and bitter. "I've been nothing but patient with this circus you call a restaurant." His face reddens further as he takes a step toward her, coffee squishing under his heavy work boots. Martha edges toward the phone behind the counter, but Frank's head snaps in her direction. "Don't you dare," he growls. "This is between me and the boss lady here." The morning sun continues to stream through the windows, creating an almost surreal contrast to the tension filling the room. The ceiling fan whirs quietly overhead, its steady rhythm a counterpoint to Frank's ragged breathing. "Sir," Evelyn tries again, taking a small step backward. "I understand you're upset, but you understand nothing." Frank's voice rises even higher. "You stand there with your perfect little smile, judging everyone who comes through that door, I've seen how you look at people like me." Evelyn's face pales slightly, but she maintains her composure. "That's not true at all. We welcome everyone here." "Lies!" Frank's massive frame seems to expand with his rage. "You're just like all the rest of them in this town, looking down their noses at anyone who doesn't fit their perfect little picture." The diner has grown so quiet that the soft tick of the wall clock seems to echo. Even the kitchen staff have stopped their work, peering through the service window with concerned expressions. "Please," Evelyn says softly, raising her hands in a peaceful gesture. "Let's just—" The sound of flesh striking flesh cracks through the air like a thunderbolt. Frank's open hand connects with Evelyn's cheek, the force of the blow turning her head to the side. Several gasps rise from the stunned customers, followed by absolute silence. Evelyn doesn't make a sound. Her small frame sways slightly as her hand slowly rises to her reddening cheek. Her eyes, wide with shock, turn toward the diner's entrance, seeking help from anyone who might be coming through the door. The bell above the door chimes softly as Jack enters the diner, his heavy boots making muffled sounds against the worn linoleum floor. His leather jacket, weathered from countless miles on the road, creaks with each movement of his broad shoulders. The morning sunlight catches on his silver rings as he pauses just inside the entrance, taking in the scene before him. The usual breakfast chatter has been replaced by a heavy silence. Even the clinking of coffee cups has stopped, as if the whole diner is holding its breath. Jack's weathered face remains neutral, but his eyes scan the room with the practiced awareness of someone who's spent years watching for trouble. At the counter, Frank's massive frame still looms, his hand clenched into a fist at his side. His face is red with anger, chest heaving beneath his stained work shirt. A puddle of spilled coffee spreads across the counter, dripping steadily onto the floor. Jack's gaze shifts to Evelyn, who sits motionless at her usual spot. Her small frame seems to have shrunk even further, her shoulders curved inward as if trying to make herself invisible. Her hand rests against her cheek, where an angry red mark is beginning to form. Her eyes are wide, still processing what just happened. The other customers remain frozen in their seats. Old Mr. Peterson grips his coffee cup so tightly his knuckles have gone white. Martha, the waitress, stands behind the counter with one hand on the phone, uncertain whether to call for help. Jack takes another step into the diner. The floorboard creaks beneath his weight, and several heads turn toward him. A few people inhale sharply as they recognize him, the tattoos visible above his collar, the well-worn leather vest beneath his jacket bearing familiar patches that speak of his affiliations. "That's him," someone whispers from a corner booth. "The Hell's Angel." The words ripple through the diner like a stone dropped in still water. More whispers follow, carrying fragments of old stories and rumors about the mysterious biker who sometimes passes through town. Jack's expression remains unchanged as he processes the scene before him. His eyes narrow slightly as they move from Evelyn's reddened cheek to Frank's aggressive stance. His jaw tightens, a muscle working beneath the stubble on his face. With deliberate slowness, he begins to walk toward the counter. Each step is measured, purposeful. His boots make soft sounds against the floor, like distant thunder approaching. The leather of his jacket continues to creak softly with each movement, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent diner. Frank shifts his weight from one foot to another, suddenly aware of the imposing figure moving in his direction. The anger on his face flickers briefly with uncertainty as he takes in Jack's size and demeanor. Evelyn looks up from her seat, her eyes meeting Jack's for a moment. There's recognition there, and something more. a complex mixture of emotions that speaks of years of history. But no one else in the diner notices this silent exchange, too focused on the tension building between the two men. The other patrons continue their hushed conversations, their words barely audible but heavy with recognition and fear of the notorious biker's presence. Yet none of them realize the true connection between the gentle widow and the intimidating man now standing in their midst. Jack's footsteps echo across the now silent diner as he closes the distance to Frank. His face remains surprisingly calm, a stark contrast to the tension filling the room. He stops a few feet from Frank, his presence somehow making the larger man seem smaller despite their difference in size. "I think you owe the lady an apology," Jack says, his voice low and controlled. The words come out almost gentle, but there's steel beneath them, like a velvet-wrapped razor blade. Frank's face twists into an ugly sneer. He looks Jack up and down, taking in the leather jacket, the tattoos, the well-worn boots. "Who do you think you are, coming in here telling me what to do?" His voice is loud, meant to cover the slight tremor of uncertainty in it. "Just someone who doesn't like seeing women getting hit," Jack replies evenly. His hands remain relaxed at his sides, but there's something in his posture that suggests coiled energy, ready to spring. Frank puffs up his chest, emboldened by Jack's calm demeanor. He takes a step closer, his bulk casting a shadow across the counter. "Listen here, you biker trash. I don't care what gang you're with. This is my town, and I'll do whatever I damn well please." The other customers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Martha, the waitress, backs away from the counter, her hand still hovering near the phone. Old Mr. Peterson sets his coffee cup down with shaking hands, the porcelain clinking against the saucer. "Last chance," Jack says quietly. "Apologize to her." Frank lets out a harsh laugh. "Or what? You gonna make me?" He jabs a thick finger into Jack's chest. "I eat guys like you for breakfast." Jack's eyes don't leave Frank's face, but something changes in them, a coldness seeping in like frost on a window. Wrong answer. Before Frank can react, Jack's movement is lightning fast but controlled. His arm shoots out, wrapping around Frank's thick neck in a precise headlock. Frank's eyes bulge in surprise, his hands clawing ineffectively at Jack's grip. "We're going to step outside," Jack says, his voice still eerily calm. "Nice and easy." Frank struggles, his face turning red, but Jack's hold is perfect, tight enough to control but not enough to choke. Jack begins walking backward toward the door, dragging Frank with him. Frank's feet scramble to keep up, his bravado completely gone. The diner's patrons watch in stunned silence as Jack maneuvers Frank through the narrow space between tables. Nobody moves to help either man. The only sounds are Frank's muffled protests and the scraping of his shoes against the floor. Jack reaches behind him with his free hand and pushes the door open. The bell jingles cheerfully, a bizarrely pleasant sound in the tense atmosphere. With one smooth motion, he pulls Frank through the doorway, the door swinging wildly on its hinges behind them. Inside the diner, the silence stretches for several long seconds. The morning sun continues to stream through the windows. The coffee machines hum quietly, but everything else seems frozen in time. The customers stare at the still swinging door, their breakfasts forgotten, trying to process what they just witnessed. Martha's hand finally drops from the phone. Old Mr. Peterson picks up his coffee cup again with trembling fingers. Someone at a corner table lets out a long, shaky breath. But no one moves from their seats, and no one says a word, as if afraid to break the spell of shock that has settled over the diner. Evelyn's fingers trace the rim of her coffee cup, the ceramic now lukewarm against her skin. The morning sunlight streaming through the diner's windows feels different now, harsher, less comforting. Her cheek still burns from Frank's slap, but it's the ache in her heart that hurts more. The quiet murmur of whispered conversations fills the diner. Evelyn catches fragments of words, knows they're talking about what just happened, about Jack, about her. She keeps her eyes fixed on the dark liquid in her cup, watching it ripple with each small tremor of her hands. Martha, the waitress, approaches with careful steps. Her usually cheerful face is creased with worry as she leans down next to Evelyn's table. "Mrs. Harrison?" she says softly, laying a gentle hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "Can I get you anything? Some ice for your cheek, maybe?" Evelyn manages a small smile and shakes her head. "I'm fine, dear," she says, but her voice wavers slightly. She's not fine, not really. The shock of being struck has settled into something deeper, a feeling of vulnerability she hasn't experienced in years. "Are you sure?" Martha persists, her concern evident in the way she hovers nearby. That was awful. What he did?" She trails off, clearly uncomfortable. "Yes, I'm sure." Evelyn nods, trying to project a strength she doesn't quite feel. Her hands wrap tighter around her coffee cup, seeking its familiar comfort. The diner has always been her safe haven, a place where she could offer warmth and kindness to others. Now that sanctuary feels somehow tainted. She glances around the diner, noting how the other customers quickly look away when they catch her eye. Some wear expressions of pity, others of discomfort. Old Mr. Peterson, who's been coming here for his morning coffee for 15 years, keeps stealing. Worried glances at her over his newspaper. The bell above the door chimes, and Evelyn's heart skips a beat. She looks up to see Jack stepping back inside, his massive frame filling the doorway. His face is set in hard lines, unreadable, but his eyes scan the room with an intensity that makes several customers shift in their seats. Jack's boots make heavy sounds against the floor as he walks toward the counter where Evelyn sits. His presence seems to draw all the air from the room. The whispered conversations die completely, replaced by a tense silence. He stops beside her, and for a moment, neither speaks. Evelyn can smell the leather of his jacket, mixed with the faint scent of motorcycle oil that always seemed to cling to him, even when he was young. It brings back memories, some sweet, some painful. "You okay?" His voice is quiet, barely above a whisper, but in the silent diner, it carries clearly. There's a gentleness in his tone that few would expect from someone like him. A softness that reminds Evelyn of the little boy who used to run to her with scraped knees and tear-stained cheeks. Evelyn looks up at him, surprised by the concern she sees in his eyes. It's been so long since they've spoken, since they've been this close. She manages another small nod, though her eyes begin to water slightly. Jack shifts his weight, his hands hanging awkwardly at his sides. She can see the uncertainty in his stance, the struggle to find the right words after so many years of silence between them. Jack eases himself into the booth across from Evelyn, his large frame making the vinyl seat creak. The morning light catches the silver in his beard, reminding Evelyn how much time has passed. She studies his face, noting the new lines around his eyes, the weathered look of someone who's lived a hard life. "I didn't know you were back in town," Evelyn says softly, breaking the heavy silence between them. Her fingers fidget with her napkin, folding and unfolding the corners. Jack's mouth turns up slightly at one corner, but the smile doesn't reach his eyes. "Been here about a week," he admits, his voice low and gravelly. "Wasn't sure how to—" He trails off, gesturing vaguely with one hand. "How to tell me?" Evelyn finishes for him. The hurt in her voice is subtle but unmistakable. Yeah. Jack looks down at the table, his tattooed hands clasped together. After everything that happened, wasn't sure I'd be welcome. Evelyn's breath catches slightly. The memories of their last argument flood back. Her fears about his involvement with the Hell's Angels, his defiance, the harsh words they'd both said. It's been 15 years, Jack. I know, Mom. He says the word carefully, like he's testing if he still has the right to use it. I made choices you couldn't accept. I understood why you had to push me away. I was scared for you, Evelyn admits, her voice barely above a whisper. Every night, I'd lie awake wondering if you were safe, if you were even alive. She pauses, gathering her courage. But maybe I was wrong to push so hard. Maybe I should have. No, Jack interrupts, shaking his head. You did what you thought was right, what any good mother would do. He runs a hand through his graying hair. I was the one who chose the life. I was the one who stayed away. The diner's usual morning sounds fill the silence between them. Coffee cups clinking, the sizzle of bacon on the grill, muted conversations. But for Evelyn and Jack, it feels like they're in their own bubble, years of unspoken words hanging between them. Thank you, Evelyn says finally, for what you did today, with Frank. She touches her cheek gently, the sting already fading. Jack's jaw tightens at the mention of Frank. Nobody gets to hurt you, he says, his voice carrying an edge of steel. Not while I'm around. The phrase hangs in the air between them, highlighting both his protective instinct and the years he wasn't there. Evelyn feels the weight of it, the complexity of their relationship condensed into those few words. Well, Jack says, pushing himself up from the booth. His movement seems sudden, almost awkward, like he's not sure how long he should stay. I should get going. He hesitates, then adds, I'll come by tomorrow, if that's okay. Evelyn nods, trying to hide the mix of emotions surging through her. I'd like that, she says quietly. Jack gives her one last look before turning towards the door. Evelyn watches him go, her heart heavy with conflicting feelings. Love for her son wells up inside her, tangled with regret for the years they've lost. As his leather-clad figure disappears through the door, she finds herself wondering about his life now, about the man he's become in the years they've been apart. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when Jack's motorcycle rumbled into the diner's parking lot. He waited until a few early customers had left before making his way inside, the bell chiming softly above his head. The familiar smell of coffee and fresh pastries filled the air, but there was a different atmosphere today. Tense, expectant. Jack chose a spot at the counter, deliberately keeping 3 empty stools between himself and the nearest customer. His leather jacket creaked as he settled onto the vinyl seat, and he noticed how the elderly man 2 spots down quickly gathered his newspaper and shuffled to a booth instead. Sarah, the young waitress, approached him with visible nervousness, coffee pot trembling slightly in her hand. Coffee? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, Jack replied softly, careful to keep his movements slow and deliberate. He watched as she filled his cup, noting how she stepped back quickly once she finished. The coffee's steam rose in lazy spirals as he wrapped his weathered hands around the warm mug. From behind the kitchen window, Evelyn stole glances at her son while preparing breakfast orders. She wanted to go to him, to bridge the gap between them, but something in his posture, the way he hunched over his coffee, his broad shoulders forming a barrier, told her he needed space. The usual morning chatter was subdued. Regular customers spoke in hushed tones, their conversations punctuated by furtive looks in Jack's direction. A couple at the window booth whispered behind their menus, and Jack could feel their stares burning into his back. He took another sip of coffee, pretending not to notice. The sound of multiple vehicles pulling into the parking lot drew everyone's attention. Through the large windows, they could see several trucks parking haphazardly, their doors opening in near unison. Frank emerged from the first vehicle, flanked by 4 other men, all of them wearing matching work uniforms from the local construction company. The bell above the door jangled harshly as Frank pushed it open, his boots heavy on the linoleum floor. His face still carried the embarrassment from yesterday, now masked by a forced bravado. His friends spread out behind him, creating an intimidating wall of crossed arms and stern expressions. Jack didn't turn around. He maintained his position at the counter, deliberately taking another sip of coffee. In the reflection of the chrome napkin holder, he could see Frank's red face and clenched fists. The construction worker's breathing was audible even across the room, each exhale carrying the weight of his wounded pride. Evelyn emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She stood near the coffee machine, her eyes darting between her son and Frank's group. The diner had gone completely silent. Even the sizzle of the grill seemed muted, as if the very building was holding its breath. Frank made his way to a booth, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silence. His friends followed, their work boots scuffing against the floor. As they settled into their seats, Frank's glare never left Jack's back. His fingers drummed against the table surface, an aggressive rhythm that seemed to pulse through the entire room. Jack remained still, his coffee cup now empty. His face betrayed no emotion, but his jaw was set firm, his shoulders tense beneath his leather jacket. He could feel the weight of everyone's stares, the regular customers, Frank and his crew, and most importantly, his mother. Evelyn stood in her corner, one hand pressed against the counter for support. She watched the scene unfold, her heart pounding in her chest. The morning sun streaming through the windows cast long shadows across the diner floor, and in those shadows she could sense the promise of confrontation brewing. Frank pushed his chair back with a screech that cut through the diner's tense silence. His heavy boots thudded against the floor as he made his way to the counter, his friends watching with eager anticipation. The morning sun caught the sweat beading on his forehead, making his face shine with an unhealthy gleam. "I want the biggest breakfast you got," Frank announced, his voice unnecessarily loud. He slapped his palm against the counter, making the silverware rattle. "And make it quick. Some of us actually work for a living." A few of his friends snickered from their booth. Sarah, the young waitress, started to move forward with her notepad, but Evelyn gently touched her arm. "I'll handle this," she said softly. The girl's relief was visible as she stepped back. Evelyn smoothed her apron and walked toward Frank with measured steps. Her hands were steady, though her heart hammered in her chest. She could feel Jack's presence at the other end of the counter, like a steady anchor in rough waters. "Frank," she said, her voice clear and firm, "I need you to leave." Frank's face reddened, and he leaned forward over the counter. "Leave? I'm a paying customer. You can't make me leave." His breath smelled of stale coffee and cigarettes. "This is my establishment," Evelyn continued, standing her ground, "and I have the right to refuse service to anyone who threatens the peace here." Her voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the gentleness. "Threaten the peace?" Frank barked out a laugh that held no humor. "That's rich, coming from someone who harbors criminals." He jerked his head toward Jack's direction. "You're gonna side with that piece of trash?" The diner had gone completely still. Even the usual morning sounds, the clinking of coffee cups, the scrape of forks against plates, had ceased. Every eye was fixed on the confrontation unfolding at the counter. "I won't leave," Frank declared, his voice rising. "Not until I get what I want." His fingers curled into fists on the countertop. and what I want is for you and your thug of a friend to understand that you can't push me around." At the other end of the counter, Jack's stool scraped against the floor as he rose to his full height. His movement was fluid, controlled, but his eyes held a dangerous glint. He took one step forward, then another. Frank's friends half rose from their seats, ready for action, but Frank held up his hand to stop them. A cruel smile played across his face as Jack approached. But before Jack could reach them, Evelyn stepped directly in front of Frank. Her back was straight, her chin lifted. The fear that had gripped her yesterday was gone, replaced by a quiet determination. "You must leave now, Frank," she repeated, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I won't ask again." Her voice carried across the silent diner, strong and unwavering. Frank sneered, his face twisting with contempt. "Or what? You'll have your attack dog here rough me up again?" He started to push himself up from his seat, looming over Evelyn's smaller frame. "I'm not going anywhere until I get what I want." But Evelyn didn't back down. She stood her ground, her eyes locked with Frank's, radiating a quiet strength that seemed to fill the entire room. The frightened widow of yesterday was gone. In her place stood a fine undead woman who had found her courage. Frank's face twisted into an ugly mask of rage. He slammed his palm against the counter one final time, making the silverware jump. "This isn't over," he growled, jabbing a finger at Evelyn. "You think you're so high and mighty? Just wait." He pushed away from the counter, his heavy frame causing the floorboards to creak beneath him. His friends scrambled to follow, chairs scraping against the floor as they rose. The bell above the door jangled violently as Frank yanked it open. "Mark my words," he called over his shoulder, his voice dripping with venom. "You'll regret this." The door slammed behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Evelyn's shoulders sagged slightly as she watched him stomp across the parking lot through the diner's front window. Her hands, which had been so steady during the confrontation, began to tremble. The weight of what had just happened settled over her like a heavy blanket. Jack appeared at her side, his presence solid and reassuring. "You okay, Mom?" he asked quietly, the word Mom still feeling strange on his tongue after so many years. She nodded, managing a small smile. "I just need a moment." She retreated to the kitchen, needing space to collect herself. The morning wore on, and word spread through the small town like wildfire. Frank made sure of it. He planted himself at the local coffee shop, then the hardware store, and finally the grocery store, telling anyone who would listen about the menace that had returned to their peaceful community. "You know what those Hell's Angels are capable of," he said loudly to Mrs. Peterson at the grocery store. "They'll bring drugs, violence. They'll destroy everything we've built here." Mrs. Peterson clutched her shopping basket tighter, her eyes wide with concern. At the hardware store, Frank cornered Mr. Thompson by the paint supplies. "That Harrison boy? He's gathering his old gang. They'll be here any day now, mark my words. We'll all be sorry then." The whispers grew louder as the day progressed. People who had known Jack since he was a boy now crossed the street when they saw him coming. Mothers hurried their children inside, casting fearful glances over their shoulders. Jack noticed the change as he walked down Main Street that afternoon. The friendly nods he'd received just yesterday were replaced with averted gazes and hushed conversations. He stopped outside the post office, pretending to check his phone while two older men talked nearby. "I heard they're all coming back," one man whispered. "The whole gang. Thompson said Harrison's been making calls, getting the old crew together. Betty at the bank said she saw some suspicious-looking bikers just outside of town," the other replied. "It's starting already. What'll happen to our property values? Our safety?" Jack's jaw tightened as he listened, his knuckles white around his phone. The shame and anger he'd worked so hard to overcome bubbled up inside him. These people had known him his whole life, had watched him grow up, and yet they were so quick to believe the worst. He glanced down at his tattooed arms, at the leather jacket he wore, symbols of a past he was trying to leave behind. But to them, he would always be dangerous, always be a threat. His expression darkened as the men's conversation continued, their fears and suspicions cutting deeper than any physical wound ever could. The evening sun cast long shadows across Evelyn's small front porch as Jack stood there, his hand hesitating before knocking. The familiar white paint was peeling in places, and the wooden steps creaked just as he remembered from his childhood. He could see warm light glowing through the kitchen window, where Evelyn was probably preparing her evening tea. His knuckles finally met the door with 3 soft raps. Inside, he heard the shuffle of slippers against hardwood floor. The door opened, and there stood his mother, wearing a faded blue cardigan and holding a steaming cup of chamomile tea. "Jack," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. "I was hoping you'd come by." The house smelled exactly as he remembered, a mix of vanilla and fresh laundry. Family photos still lined the walls of the narrow hallway, though he noticed his teenage photos were conspicuously absent. His chest tightened at the thought. They made their way to the living room, where Evelyn settled into her favorite armchair, the one with the worn armrests and floral pattern. Jack chose the wooden chair by the window, feeling too large and rough for the delicate furniture. "I've been hearing things around town," Evelyn began, her fingers wrapped around her teacup. "Frank's been busy spreading stories about you." Jack's jaw clenched. "Yeah, I know." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd never quite broken. "People are scared. They think the whole gang's coming back." "Are you—" Evelyn paused, choosing her words carefully. "Do you plan to stay this time, Jack?" The question hung heavy in the air between them. Jack stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening street. A neighbor across the way quickly pulled their curtains closed when they saw him. "I came back for you, Mom," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "After what happened with Frank, I couldn't just—" He trailed off, his shoulders tense. "But maybe I shouldn't have. Everything I did, everything I was. It follows me. People don't forget." Evelyn set her tea down and stood, taking a few steps toward her son. "The past is the past, Jack." "Is it?" He turned to face her, his eyes pained. "Look at how quick they were to believe Frank. One word about the Hells Angels, and suddenly I'm a monster again. Maybe they're right to be afraid." "They're not," Evelyn said firmly. Jack let out a bitter laugh. "You were afraid too, Mom. That's why you pushed me away, remember?" The words hung between them like a physical barrier. Evelyn flinched slightly, but didn't back down. "I was wrong then," she admitted. "I was scared of losing you to that life. Instead, I lost you because of my own fear." Jack's expression softened slightly, but the tension remained in his shoulders. "I want to be here, to make things right, but—" He hesitated, looking down at his hands that had done things he'd never wanted his mother to know about. "People will talk when they find out I'm your son. They'll judge you for it. Maybe it's better if I just—" "No," Evelyn interrupted, her voice stronger than he'd heard it in years. "I don't care what anyone thinks anymore, Jack. I want my son back in my life." Jack nodded slowly, swallowing hard against the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. But despite his mother's words, he couldn't quite meet her eyes. The wall between them, built from years of separation and unspoken hurts, still stood firm. The morning air was crisp as Evelyn locked up the diner's back door. She'd stayed late to finish the monthly inventory, and the parking lot was empty except for her old blue Buick. As she fumbled with her keys, a shadow fell across the pavement. "All alone tonight, Mrs. Harrison?" Frank's voice dripped with mock concern. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly, but she kept her movements steady, refusing to show fear. She turned to face him, drawing herself up to her full height, despite being a foot shorter than him. "The diner's closed, Frank," she said firmly. "You need to leave." Frank circled around her like a predator, his heavy boots scraping against the asphalt. "You know, it's funny how things work out," he said, stopping between her and her car. "Your son thinks he's such a big shot pushing people around, but what happens when he's not here?" "I'm not afraid of you," Evelyn replied, though her heart hammered in her chest. Frank laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the empty lot. "Maybe you should be. Things happen in small towns like this, accidents, mishaps," he shrugged, "especially to people who don't know their place." Evelyn gripped her purse tighter, her knuckles white. "Is that a threat, Frank?" "Just stating facts," he said, moving closer. "Your boy can't be everywhere at once, and people around here, they're starting to remember what the angels did to this town years ago. How many businesses they destroyed, how many lives they ruined." He sneered. "Like mother, like son, right?" From across the parking lot, a motorcycle's engine roared to life. Jack emerged from the shadows, his bike's headlight cutting through the darkness. He pulled up beside them, the engine's rumble filling the tense silence. "Everything okay here, Mom?" Jack's voice was controlled, but his eyes blazed with anger. Frank's demeanor shifted instantly, a smirk spreading across his face. "Well, if it isn't the hero himself." He held up his hands in mock surrender. "Just having a friendly chat with Mrs. Harrison here. No law against that, is there?" Jack dismounted his bike, his movements deliberate and careful. "Stay away from my mother." "Or what?" Frank's smile widened. "You'll rough me up again? Prove everything I've been telling people about you?" He took a step closer to Jack. "You're nothing but a thug in a leather jacket. The whole town knows it now." Jack's fists clenched at his sides, but he remained still. Evelyn could see the muscle working in his jaw as he fought to control his temper. "You're pathetic, Frank," Jack said quietly. "Threatening an elderly woman makes you feel big?" Frank laughed again, the sound echoing off the brick walls of the diner. "See, that's all you know. Intimidation. But it won't work anymore, tough guy. I'm not scared of you." Jack took a deep breath, his shoulders rigid with tension. After a long moment, he turned away, walking back to his motorcycle. "Come on, Mom," he said. "I'll follow you home." "That's right, walk away," Frank called after them. "Show everyone what a coward you really are." Jack helped Evelyn into her car, his hands gentle despite his obvious anger. As she started the engine, she could see Frank still standing in the parking lot, his triumphant grin visible in her rearview mirror. The distance between her son and Frank seemed to crackle with unresolved tension, a powder keg waiting for a spark. The morning sun had barely risen when Evelyn pulled into the diner's parking lot. Her hands were steady as she turned off the ignition, a new resolve burning in her heart. She'd spent a sleepless night thinking about Frank's threats, about her son, about the life she'd built in this town. Enough was enough. As if on cue, Frank's beaten-up pickup truck rumbled into the lot. He stepped out, his usual sneer plastered across his face. Evelyn watched him through her windshield, remembering how he'd threatened her the night before. Instead of fear, she felt something different today. Determination. She got out of her car and stood tall, her silver hair catching the early morning light. Frank spotted her and started walking over, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. "Well, well," he called out. "Starting early today, Mrs. Harrison?" Evelyn didn't move. She planted her feet firmly on the ground and looked him straight in the eye. "We need to talk, Frank." His eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "Oh? And what could you possibly have to say to me?" Several regular customers had already arrived and were watching through the diner's windows. Their faces pressed against the glass, worried expressions clear even from a distance. "I've spent 40 years in this town," Evelyn began, her voice clear and strong. "I've served countless meals, dried countless tears, and listened to more stories than I can remember. I've helped people when they were down on their luck, and they've helped me when I needed it." Frank's smirk wavered slightly. "I've weathered worse storms than you, Frank Daniels," she continued, taking a step forward. "I've buried a husband, raised a son alone, and kept this diner running through good times and bad. And I will not let you destroy the peace I've worked so hard to build." "You think you're something special?" Frank shot back, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "You and your criminal son?" "My son may have made mistakes," Evelyn said firmly, "but at least he's trying to make things right. What are you doing, Frank? Bullying an old woman? Spreading lies? Is that what makes you feel strong?" The morning breeze rustled through the trees, and for a moment, the only sound was the gentle flapping of the American flag above the diner. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," Evelyn declared, her voice carrying across the parking lot. "This stops now. You can either be part of this community or you can leave it, but I won't let you terrorize it anymore." Frank's face reddened, his mouth opening and closing as he searched for words. The customers in the diner had grown silent, their faces still pressed against the windows. Some had begun to nod slowly, their expressions showing support for Evelyn's words. Finally, Frank's shoulders slumped slightly. He glared at Evelyn one last time, his eyes burning with humiliation and anger. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his steps heavy but lacking their usual swagger. Inside the diner, people began to smile and nod more visibly. Mrs. Peterson, one of Evelyn's oldest customers, gave her a thumbs up through the window. Mr. Jenkins, the retired schoolteacher, tipped his hat in respect. Evelyn felt her confidence growing with each passing moment, but she couldn't completely shake the worry in her heart. She knew standing up to a bully was right, but she also knew that sometimes wounded pride could be more dangerous than outright threats. Jack sat alone in his small motel room, the lamp on the bedside table casting a soft yellow glow across the worn carpet. In his weathered hands, he held an old shoebox filled with photographs, each one a snapshot of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else now. He pulled out a faded picture of himself as a young boy, maybe 7 or 8, standing proudly next to a freshly baked apple pie. His mother stood behind him, her hands on his shoulders, both of them beaming at the camera. The corners of his mouth twitched at the memory of that day, how she'd taught him to carefully peel the apples, measure the spices, and crimp the edges of the crust just right. Another photo showed his high school graduation. Evelyn stood tall and proud beside him, her eyes bright with tears of joy. That was before everything went wrong, before the motorcycle gang, before the fights and the disappointment in her eyes. Jack's fingers trembled slightly as he sorted through more memories. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, fishing trips with his dad before he passed. Each image was like a punch to the gut, reminding him of everything he'd walked away from. He found a newspaper clipping from 15 years ago. The headline read, "Local gang activity raises concerns." There he was, younger and angrier, sitting on his motorcycle with the Hells Angels patch clearly visible on his leather jacket. He remembered how Evelyn had begged him to leave the gang, how she'd cried when he chose them over her. "I was such a fool," he muttered, running his hand over his face. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked 2:47 a.m. Jack couldn't sleep, the weight of decades of regret pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. He thought about his mother standing up to Frank earlier that day, showing more courage than he'd ever given her credit for. As the night wore on, Jack continued to sift through the photographs, each one stirring memories he'd tried so hard to forget. There was one of him and Evelyn at the county fair, cotton candy stuck to his face as she laughed. Another showed them working together in the diner's kitchen when he was a teenager, before everything fell apart. When morning finally came, Jack knew what he had to do. He drove to the diner early, before the breakfast rush, knowing his mother would be there preparing for the day. The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and Evelyn looked up from where she was arranging fresh flowers on the counter. "Mom," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Can we talk?" They sat in a booth away from the windows, 2 cups of coffee growing cold between them. Jack placed the shoebox on the table, his hands resting heavily on its lid. "I've been looking at these all night," he began, opening the box and carefully pulling out the graduation photo. "Remembering everything I threw away." Evelyn reached for the photograph, her fingers gentle as she traced its edges. "I was so angry when you pushed me away," Jack continued, his voice thick. "I told myself you didn't understand me, that you were ashamed of who I was. But the truth is, I was the one who was ashamed. I was scared of letting you down, so I pushed you away first." Tears began to well in Evelyn's eyes as she listened. "I want to try again, Mom," Jack said, meeting her gaze. "It won't be easy, and it'll take time, but I want to find my way back. If you'll let me." Evelyn reached across the table, taking his rough hands in her soft ones. "Oh, Jack," she whispered, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "We'll find our way together." The morning sun had barely risen when Frank paced back and forth in the parking lot of Miller's Hardware, his face flushed with anger. A group of townspeople gathered around him, their expressions a mix of uncertainty and determination. Some shifted nervously on their feet, while others crossed their arms, nodding as Frank spoke. "That Hell's Angel thinks he can just waltz back into our town?" Frank's voice carried across the empty lot. "And now he's got poor Evelyn wrapped around his finger. We need to show them both that they're not welcome here." Inside the diner, the usual morning routine was underway. Evelyn hummed softly as she arranged fresh flowers in small vases, while Jack sat at the counter, sipping his coffee and reading the morning paper. The regular customers trickled in, filling the air with the gentle murmur of conversation and the clink of silverware against plates. The bell above the door chimed, but this time it wasn't the cheerful single ring that usually announced a customer. The door burst open, banging against the wall as Frank led his group inside. 10 people crowded behind him, their faces set in hard lines. "Well, well," Frank sneered, his voice cutting through the peaceful atmosphere. "If it isn't the town's newest power couple." Jack slowly put down his newspaper, his jaw tightening. Evelyn stopped mid-step, a coffee pot clutched in her hands. The other customers fell silent, their breakfasts forgotten. "What do you want, Frank?" Jack's voice was low and controlled, but his fingers gripped the edge of the counter. "We want you gone," Frank declared, stepping forward. "Both of you. This town doesn't need your kind here." He turned to address the other customers. "You all know what the Hell's Angels are capable of, and now he's corrupting one of our most respected citizens." Evelyn set down the coffee pot with a sharp click. "That's enough, Frank." "Oh, is it?" Frank laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the diner. "You used to be someone people looked up to, Evelyn. Now look at you, defending this criminal." The group behind Frank began to move forward, spreading out across the diner. Some knocked over chairs, while others slammed their fists on tables, making dishes rattle. The regular customers pressed themselves against the walls, trying to stay out of the way. Jack stood up slowly, his presence commanding attention. His eyes darted from person to person, assessing the threat. The muscles in his arms tensed as he prepared for what might come next. "You're making a mistake," Jack warned, his voice barely above a whisper. Frank stepped closer, jabbing a finger in Jack's direction. "The only mistake was letting you come back here. You think wearing normal clothes and drinking coffee makes you one of us? Once a gang member, always a gang member." The tension in the room crackled like electricity. Someone knocked over a glass, and it shattered on the floor. Another person started shoving tables aside, creating a circle around Jack and Frank. But before Jack could respond, Evelyn moved. She walked straight into the center of the confrontation, her steps steady and purposeful. Her voice, when it came, carried the strength of 70 years of quiet dignity. "Stop this," she commanded, looking at each face in turn. "This is my diner, and I won't have this kind of behavior here." The room froze. Frank's group hesitated, thrown off by her directness. Jack's hands clenched into fists as he watched his mother face down the mob, his protective instinct warring with his respect for her strength. Evelyn stood her ground, her back straight, and her chin lifted. "I won't let you destroy what I've built here. Not you, Frank, or anyone else." Frank's face twisted with rage as he took a threatening step toward Evelyn. In that instant, Jack moved forward, placing himself between his mother and Frank, his eyes blazing with barely contained fury. Jack's voice cut through the tension like steel. "You want to know who I really am, Frank?" He took a deliberate step forward, his shoulders squared. "I'm not the monster you're trying to make me out to be. I'm Evelyn Harrison's son." A collective gasp rippled through the diner. Several of Frank's supporters exchanged uncertain glances, their resolve wavering. "That's right," Jack continued, his voice steady and clear. "The woman you've all known for years, the one who served you coffee, listened to your troubles, and helped this community in more ways than I can count. She's my mother." Frank's face reddened, but the confident sneer he'd worn moments ago began to crack. He glanced around at his supporters, searching for backup, but found only hesitation in their eyes. "You've been spreading lies about me," Jack said, taking another step closer to Frank. "Trying to scare everyone with stories about the Hells Angels. But look at me now. Am I threatening you? Am I causing chaos?" He spread his arms wide, showing his empty hands. "The only person creating problems in this town is you." Evelyn moved to stand beside her son, her presence adding weight to his words. "I've watched my son change, Frank. I pushed him away once because I was afraid, and that was my mistake. But he came back to make things right." The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the diner floor. In the golden light, Jack's tattoos seemed less threatening, more like marks of a past life than symbols of danger. "I could hurt you right now, Frank," Jack said quietly. "With my background, my training, it would be easy." He lowered his voice even further. "But I'm not that person anymore, and I won't let you or anyone else push me back into being that man." Frank took a step backward, his bravado crumbling. The mob mentality he'd carefully cultivated began to dissolve as his supporters saw the truth before them. Not a dangerous biker, but a son standing beside his mother. "The thing is, Frank," Jack continued, "real strength isn't about intimidation or violence. It's about knowing when not to fight. My mother taught me that, even if it took me years to learn it." One by one, Frank's supporters began to back away. Some even mumbled apologies as they headed for the door. The regular customers who had pressed themselves against the walls slowly relaxed, their faces showing a new understanding. Frank stood alone now, his earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. He looked around the diner, at the faces watching him, and saw something he hadn't expected, disappointment rather than fear. "This isn't the end," Frank tried to bluster, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Evelyn said firmly. "You can either leave now and come back tomorrow as a customer who treats people with respect, or you can leave and not come back at all. The choice is yours." Frank's shoulders sagged. The fight drained from his face as he looked between mother and son. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. The bell chimed softly as he left, a stark contrast to his dramatic entrance. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as people filed in, filling the rows of metal folding chairs. Morning sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting long rectangles of light across the worn wooden floor. Evelyn sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Jack stood at the back, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Mayor Thompson cleared his throat and approached the podium. "We're here today to address recent events that have divided our community," he began, his voice echoing in the packed room. "Mrs. Harrison and her son Jack have asked to speak with us." Evelyn rose slowly, her steps measured as she made her way to the podium. Jack pushed off from the wall and joined her, his presence towering beside her small frame. The contrast between them was striking, her soft floral dress against his leather jacket, her silver hair next to his tattooed arms. "I've served coffee in this town for longer than some of you have been alive," Evelyn began, her voice trembling slightly. "You've shared your joys and sorrows with me over countless cups of coffee, but I've kept my own sorrow hidden." She paused, glancing up at Jack. "The pain of pushing away my only son." Jack stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his mother's shoulder. The tender gesture surprised many in the audience who had only seen his intimidating exterior. "I made mistakes," Jack said, his deep voice carrying across the silent room. "Bad choices that hurt my mother, that made her afraid for me. When she told me to leave, I did. But I carried that rejection like a weight for years." Evelyn wiped a tear from her cheek. "I thought I was protecting myself, protecting my reputation in this town. But all I did was lose precious years with my son. Years we can never get back." Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably, remembering their own recent judgments and whispered conversations. "When I came back," Jack continued, "I wasn't looking for forgiveness. I just wanted to make sure my mother was safe. But she gave me something I didn't expect, a second chance." "We've both learned," Evelyn added, her voice stronger now, "that healing starts with forgiveness, not just forgiving each other, but forgiving ourselves." The silence in the room was profound. Several people dabbed at their eyes with tissues or handkerchiefs. "I know what you all see when you look at me," Jack said, gesturing to his tattoos and leather jacket. "But I'm more than my past. I'm a son who loves his mother, and I'm asking for a chance to prove that people can change." Evelyn reached up and took Jack's hand. "This town has always been my home," she said, "and I'm asking you to make it a home for my son, too." As they stepped away from the podium, the room remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, people began to stand. Mrs. Chen, who had been coming to the diner for morning coffee for 20 years, was the first to approach them. "Evelyn," she said, tears in her eyes, "I'm so sorry for believing the rumors." She turned to Jack. "And I'm sorry for judging you without knowing your story." Others followed, forming a line to speak with mother and son. Old Mr. Peterson, who had initially been one of the most vocal critics of Jack's presence, shook his hand firmly. "Any son who stands up for his mother like you did is welcome in my book," he said gruffly. The townspeople surrounded them with words of support and understanding, their earlier fears and prejudices melting away in the face of truth and vulnerability. Jack stood tall beside his mother, but his usual defensive posture had softened. For the first time since he'd returned, he felt like he might actually belong. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Jack and Evelyn walked down the quiet streets of their small town. Their footsteps fell into an easy rhythm on the cracked sidewalk, matching the peaceful mood that had settled between them after the community meeting. "You know," Jack said, breaking their comfortable silence, "I used to lie awake at night wondering if you ever thought about me." He kicked a small pebble, watching it skitter across the concrete. "Those first few years after I left were the hardest." Evelyn's heart tightened at his words. She clasped her hands together, fighting the urge to reach out and touch his arm. "I thought about you every day, Jack. Every single day." They passed the old Parker house with its white picket fence, where Jack had once delivered newspapers as a boy. "I was so angry for so long," he continued, his voice softer now. "Not just at you, but at myself. I knew I was messing up, but I couldn't stop. Then when you told me to leave..." He shook his head, struggling to find the right words. "I was scared," Evelyn admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I saw what was happening with the gang, I thought if I pushed you away hard enough, you'd wake up and change course. Instead, I lost you completely." They stopped at the corner where Main Street met Maple Drive. Jack turned to face his mother, his eyes filled with emotion. "I did wake up, Mom. It just took longer than either of us wanted. Those years with the Angels..." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "They taught me what I didn't want to become." Evelyn looked up at her son, really looked at him. Beyond the tattoos and the leather jacket, she saw the little boy who used to bring her dandelions from the backyard. "You've changed so much, Jack. The way you handled everything with Frank, how you stood up there today and spoke from your heart." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "I'm so proud of the man you've become." Jack swallowed hard, touched by her words. They resumed walking, passing by Mrs. Peterson's rose garden and the old oak tree, where Jack had built a treehouse as a child. The memories seemed closer now, less painful. "You know what helped me the most?" Jack asked as they turned onto Cedar Lane. "Realizing that holding on to that anger was hurting me more than anyone else. It took years of therapy to figure that out." "Therapy?" Evelyn asked, surprised. Jack nodded. "Started about 5 years ago. Couldn't sleep, couldn't maintain relationships. Finally realized I needed help dealing with everything, the abandonment, the guilt, all of it." They reached Evelyn's modest 2-story house, its blue paint fading slightly in the afternoon sun. The front yard needed attention. Weeds had sprouted between the flower beds, and the grass had grown too tall. Jack surveyed the yard, then turned to his mother. "Your garden's looking a little rough. How about I come by tomorrow and help you clean it up? Maybe plant some new flowers?" Evelyn felt tears welling up in her eyes. This simple offer meant more than any grand gesture could have. She saw in it the promise of more time together, of quiet conversations over garden work, of rebuilding what they had lost. "I'd like that very much," she said, smiling through her tears. She looked at her son, standing tall and strong beside her, and felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in years, she could see a future filled with possibility rather than regret. The community center's worn brick walls and scuffed linoleum floors had seen better days, but to Jack Harrison, it felt like the perfect place for a fresh start. He stood in the empty recreation room, hands in his pockets, studying the space. Old basketball hoops hung at either end, and metal folding chairs were stacked against one wall. Sarah Chen, the center's director, clicked her pen against her clipboard. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Harrison? These kids can be..." She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Difficult?" Jack offered, with a slight smile. I used to be one of them." The sound of sneakers squeaking on the floor drew their attention. A group of teenagers shuffled in, led by Tommy Martinez, a lanky 16-year-old with defiant eyes and a permanent scowl. Jack recognized that look. He'd worn it himself at that age. "Who's the biker dude?" one kid whispered, not quite quietly enough. Jack crossed his arms, his tattoos visible beneath his rolled-up sleeves. The leather vest he wore bore no patches now, but its worn edges told stories of a rougher past. "Name's Jack," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "And I'm here to talk about jobs." A few snickers rippled through the group. Tommy rolled his eyes. "What do you know about jobs?" "More than you might think." Jack pulled up a chair, its metal legs scraping against the floor. "I've worked construction, mechanics, managed crews. But first, I made every mistake you could think of." The room grew quiet. Jack looked at each face in turn, seeing versions of his younger self in their expressions. The anger, the uncertainty, the desperate need to prove themselves. "Most of you probably heard about what happened at the diner," Jack continued. "About Frank, about my mother." He paused, letting the memory sink in. "That could have gone different ways. The old me would have put him in the hospital, but that's not who I am anymore." Tommy shifted in his seat, his tough facade cracking slightly. "So what? We're supposed to just let people push us around?" "No," Jack said firmly. "You're supposed to be smarter than that, stronger than that." He rolled up his sleeve further, revealing a faded tattoo. "See this? Got it when I was 17, thought it made me tough. What it really did was close doors. Took me years to figure out that real strength isn't about intimidation." He stood up, pacing slowly in front of the group. "I'm offering you guys something I wish someone had offered me at your age. Real skills, real work, a chance to build something instead of tearing things down." A smaller kid in the back raised his hand tentatively. "What kind of work?" "Starting with basic maintenance and repairs around town. I've got connections with local businesses willing to give you a shot." Jack's voice grew more passionate. "But first, you need to understand something. This isn't just about learning to fix cars or paint houses. It's about fixing what's broken inside." The room fell silent again, but this time it was different. The teenagers leaned forward slightly, their attention fully captured. Jack could see it in their eyes. The first glimmer of hope, the same spark he'd felt when he'd finally decided to change his life. "I went from being a Hell's Angel to being someone my mother could be proud of," Jack said, his voice carrying weight. "It wasn't easy, still isn't. But every day I choose to be better than I was yesterday." He looked at Tommy, who was now sitting straighter in his chair. "That's what real strength looks like." The group listened intently as Jack began sharing his story of redemption, of the long road from who he was to who he'd become. In their faces, he saw not just attention, but understanding, the first steps toward their own transformations. The morning sun cast long shadows through the diner's windows, turning the chrome fixtures into ribbons of light. Evelyn stood behind the counter, arranging fresh-baked muffins in their usual display. Jack sat nearby, nursing his third cup of coffee, his weathered hands wrapped around the warm mug. The bell above the door chimed, and Frank's bulky frame filled the doorway. The usual morning chatter died down as heads turned to watch him. He looked different somehow. Shoulders slumped, eyes downcast. None of the swagger that had defined him these past weeks. Frank shuffled toward the counter, his work boots scuffing against the linoleum floor. Jack's muscles tensed instinctively, but he remained seated, watching carefully as Frank approached his mother. "Mrs. Harrison," Frank said, his voice barely above a whisper. Could I speak with you for a moment?" Evelyn paused, her hands still holding a blueberry muffin. She glanced at Jack, who gave her a slight nod, then turned to Frank. "Of course, Frank." Frank's fingers drummed nervously on the counter. His face had lost its usual ruddy anger, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, clearing his throat, "about everything that happened, about how I treated you." The diner had grown so quiet you could hear the coffee maker's gentle gurgle from the kitchen. Frank continued, his words coming out in short, difficult bursts. "I was angry. So angry. At everything. My ex-wife, my kids who won't talk to me, my dead-end job." He swallowed hard. "But none of that was your fault. You were just being kind, like you are to everyone. And I couldn't stand it because..." His voice cracked slightly. "Because I didn't think I deserved kindness." Evelyn set down the muffin she was holding, her eyes softening as she listened. Jack remained still, but his grip on the coffee mug loosened slightly. "When I saw you and Jack together," Frank continued, "how you stood by each other, how you found your way back to being family. It hit me hard, made me realize what I'd lost with my own family." He looked up, meeting Evelyn's eyes. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for hitting you, for threatening you, for trying to turn the town against Jack. I was wrong. All of it was wrong." Tears welled up in Frank's eyes, something no one in town had ever seen before. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know that I understand now. I understand what a fool I've been." Evelyn walked around the counter, her steps slow but purposeful. She stood before Frank, this man who had caused her so much fear and pain, and saw something she hadn't noticed before. Loneliness, deep and consuming, etched into every line of his face. "Frank," she said gently, "we all make mistakes. We all carry pain that sometimes spills onto others." She reached out and placed her hand on his arm. "The hard part isn't making the mistakes. It's finding the courage to admit them and try to make things right." Jack stood up from his stool, moving to stand beside his mother. He looked at Frank, seeing not the bully who had terrorized the diner, but a broken man trying to find his way back. With a slight nod, Jack extended his hand. Frank stared at the offered hand for a moment, then took it, his grip firm but no longer threatening. Evelyn smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears, as she watched these two men, once bitter enemies, share a moment of understanding. The aroma of pot, roast filled Evelyn's small kitchen as she and Jack sat down at her well-worn oak table. Steam rose from their plates, carrying memories of Sunday dinners from years past. The familiar squeaks of their chairs against the linoleum floor broke the comfortable silence between them. Jack looked around the kitchen, taking in the familiar yellow curtains his mother had hung decades ago, and the collection of ceramic roosters that still lined the windowsill. Everything was exactly as he remembered it, yet somehow different, warmer, more welcoming than it had felt in years. "This tastes just like I remember," Jack said softly, cutting into the tender meat. "Nobody makes pot roast like you, Mom." Evelyn smiled, watching her son savor each bite. "Well, I had years of practice, didn't I? Though I must admit, I never thought I'd be cooking it for you again." Jack set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. "I didn't think I'd ever sit at this table again either." He gestured to the kitchen around them. "Everything that's happened these past few weeks, it's like waking up from a long nightmare." "Life has a funny way of bringing us full circle," Evelyn said, reaching for the salt shaker. "Sometimes the longest journeys lead us right back home." They ate in comfortable silence for a few moments, the only sounds the gentle clink of silverware against plates and the distant ticking of the old wall clock, the same one that had counted the minutes of their separation for so many years. "You know," Jack began, his voice thick with emotion. "I spent so many years angry. Angry at you for pushing me away, angry at myself for letting you down." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "But now I understand why you did what you did. You were trying to protect me, weren't you? Even when you pushed me away." Evelyn's eyes grew misty. "Oh, Jack, I was so afraid back then. Afraid of losing you to that life, afraid of watching you destroy yourself." She dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. "But pushing you away, that was my biggest mistake. I should have held on tighter, should have fought harder to keep you close." "We both made mistakes," Jack said, reaching across the table to cover his mother's hand with his own. "But look at us now. Look at how far we've come." Through the kitchen window, the evening sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Evelyn turned to watch the colors deepen, her hand still clasped in her son's strong grip. The peaceful moment wrapped around them like a warm blanket, healing old wounds and strengthening their renewed bond. "It's beautiful," she whispered, nodding toward the sunset. Jack squeezed her hand gently. "Yeah, it is." Their eyes met across the table, and they shared a smile, one that spoke of forgiveness, understanding, and the deep, unshakable love between a mother and her son. In that moment, they both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, their bond stronger for having been broken and carefully, lovingly rebuilt. They sat there, hand in hand, watching as the sun painted the sky in ever-changing colors, their hearts full with the peace they'd finally found. The morning sunlight streamed through the freshly cleaned windows of the diner, casting warm patches across the checkered floor. The place hummed with life, the cheerful clinking of coffee cups, the sizzle of bacon on the grill, and the gentle murmur of conversation filled the air. Every booth was occupied, and people waited patiently by the door for a chance to grab a seat at the counter. Evelyn moved between tables with practiced ease, her silver hair neatly pinned back, a genuine smile lighting up her face. She topped off coffee cups and chatted with customers, both old friends and new faces alike. The regular customers, who had supported her through thick and thin, now shared space with unfamiliar folks who had heard about the diner's welcoming atmosphere. Jack stood behind the counter, his tattooed arms visible beneath his rolled-up sleeves as he worked the grill. He'd taken to helping out during the breakfast rush, and though cooking wasn't his forte, he'd learned enough to handle the basics. More importantly, his presence had become a source of comfort rather than intimidation. "Order up," he called out, sliding 2 plates of eggs and hash browns across the counter to Sarah, their newest waitress. She gave him a grateful nod as she whisked them away to a waiting table. Mrs. Peterson, a longtime regular, waved Evelyn over to her usual corner booth. "This place has never been more alive," she said, beaming. "It's wonderful to see so many new faces." Evelyn paused at her table, coffee pot in hand. "It certainly is, though I have to admit sometimes I miss the quiet mornings." "Oh, nonsense," Mrs. Peterson chuckled. "You're in your element, dear, and that son of yours—" She glanced toward Jack with approval. "He's really turned things around, hasn't he?" At the counter, Jack was showing a young boy how to properly spin on the chrome and red vinyl stools. The child's laughter rang out above the din of the diner, and Jack's usually stern face softened into a genuine smile. The bell above the door chimed as Frank entered, now a regular himself. He'd become something of a fixture at the counter, quietly eating his breakfast and occasionally sharing a word or two with Jack. The transformation in him was remarkable. Gone was the angry, bitter man who had caused so much trouble. In his place was someone who seemed to have found his own measure of peace. Evelyn made her way back to the kitchen, passing Jack as he carried plates to a table. They shared a quick glance and a smile. the kind of wordless communication that had developed between them over the past months. Their relationship had deepened into something stronger than before, tempered by their trials and strengthened by their shared determination to make things right. The morning rush continued. Steady stream of people flowing through the doors. Each person who entered seemed to bring their own energy to the place, contributing to the warmth and vitality that had become the diner's trademark. The bell chimed again, and a group of newcomers stepped inside, looking around with curious expressions. They were clearly not locals, perhaps travelers passing through or folks who had heard about the diner's reputation for good food and friendly faces. Evelyn turned toward them, her welcoming smile already in place. Jack watched from his spot at the grill, his chest swelling with quiet pride as he observed his mother in her element. They had built something special here. Not just a successful business, but a true community-gathering place where everyone was welcome. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, turning the bright morning into an ominous twilight. The weather radio crackled with warnings of an approaching severe storm system. Wind rattled the diner's windows as Evelyn hurried to bring in the outdoor furniture. "Let me help with that, Mom," Jack called out, rushing from behind the counter. He grabbed the heavy metal chairs with ease, stacking them efficiently while Evelyn gathered the smaller items. Thunder boomed overhead, making the building shudder. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, drumming against the roof. The few customers inside the diner looked up nervously at the ceiling. "Looks like we might be here a while," Mrs. Peterson said, clutching her coffee cup. "That storm's moving in fast." The diner's phone started ringing non-stop. People from all over town called, asking if they were still open. Each time, Evelyn assured them they were. "The diner's always open during emergencies," she told a worried caller. "Come on over if you need shelter." Soon, people began arriving in groups, soaked from the rain. A young mother hurried in with 2 small children, their clothes dripping. An elderly couple followed, helped by their adult son. Jack grabbed clean towels from the back while Evelyn started brewing fresh pots of coffee. "Get those kids some hot chocolate," Jack told Sarah, who was already filling cups as fast as she could. The children's eyes lit up at his words, momentarily forgetting their fear of the storm. The wind howled louder, and the lights flickered ominously. Jack disappeared into the back, returning with flashlights and battery-powered lanterns he'd stored there months ago. "Just in case," he said, setting them on the counter. More people arrived, seeking refuge from the storm. The diner quickly filled beyond capacity, but nobody seemed to mind the crowding. Evelyn moved through the packed space, offering comfort and warm drinks to everyone. "We've got plenty of soup," she announced, heading to the kitchen, "and the gas stove will work even if we lose power." Jack worked alongside her, chopping vegetables for the soup pot. Their movements were synchronized, born from months of working together in the kitchen. Every now and then, their eyes met in silent understanding. They were exactly where they needed to be. The lights flickered again and finally went out. A few people gasped, but Jack was ready with the lanterns. The warm glow created a cozy atmosphere despite the raging storm outside. "Everyone stay calm," Evelyn said, her voice steady and reassuring. "We're all safe in here." The aroma of homemade soup filled the air as Jack and Evelyn served bowl after bowl. People shared tables with strangers, swapping stories and offering words of encouragement to those who seemed scared. Frank, who had been quietly helping direct traffic in the crowded diner, approached the counter. "Need an extra pair of hands?" he asked Jack. Jack nodded, handing him a stack of bowls. "Thanks," he said simply, and they worked together serving the growing crowd. Hours passed, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. The diner became an island of warmth and light in the darkness. Children dozed in their parents' laps while adults talked in hushed voices. Evelyn kept the soup coming, and Jack made sure everyone had blankets from the emergency supplies he'd stashed away. Through it all, mother and son moved in perfect harmony, their shared purpose stronger than ever. The diner had become more than just a restaurant. It was a haven, a place of safety and comfort for their community in need. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the dissipating storm clouds, casting a golden glow over the rain-soaked streets. Puddles reflected the brightening sky like scattered mirrors across the parking lot. Inside the diner, exhausted townspeople were slowly waking up from their makeshift beds on booths and chairs. Evelyn stood at the window, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The tension in her shoulders began to ease as she watched the storm clouds retreat. Behind her, Jack was helping people gather their belongings and checking if anyone needed assistance getting home. "Mrs. Thompson, let me walk you to your car," Jack said, offering his arm to an elderly woman who had spent the night in one of the corner booths. She smiled gratefully, patting his hand as they made their way to the door. Evelyn watched her son's reflection in the window glass. His gentle handling of their temporary guests touched her heart. This was the same man whom many had once feared, now showing such care and consideration for others. The morning light strengthened, revealing the storm's aftermath. Branches and debris littered the streets, but remarkably, the damage seemed minimal. A few people had already started the cleanup, dragging fallen limbs to the curb. "The miller's roof looks intact," Evelyn observed, as Jack returned from helping Mrs. Thompson. "I was worried about them. Their house is so old." Jack moved to stand beside her at the window. His presence was solid and reassuring, just as it had been throughout the long night. Together they watched more townspeople emerge from the diner, heading home to check on their properties. "You know," Evelyn said softly, "I never thought I'd see the day when this place would become such a shelter." She gestured to the dining room behind them, where Sarah was collecting blankets and Frank was helping to straighten chairs. "You've always made it a safe place," Jack replied, his voice quiet but firm. "Even before last night. That's why people knew they could come here during the storm." The morning sun continued to rise, painting the wet pavement with streaks of gold. A rainbow appeared in the distance, its colors vivid against the retreating dark clouds. The sight made Evelyn smile, nature's own symbol of hope after the storm. Jack placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Remember when I was little, and you'd tell me that rainbows were God's way of saying everything would be all right?" Evelyn nodded, feeling tears well up in her eyes. "I didn't think you remembered that." "I remembered everything, Mom. Even when I was away, I remembered." They stood in comfortable silence, watching as the town slowly came back to life. A few cars drove past, their tires splashing through puddles. Neighbors called out greetings to each other across the street, checking to make sure everyone was okay. The morning light filled the diner now, warm and bright. It caught the chrome of the counter and the polished surface of the coffee machine, making everything gleam. The storm's darkness was completely gone, replaced by the promise of a new day. Jack, with a quiet smile, said, "We made it, Mom." Evelyn smiled back, her heart full. She knew their journey together was only just beginning, and they would face whatever comes next, side by side. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.